evening, everyone. Thank you so much for attending this presentation tonight. My name is Violet Penman, and I'm here representing two of the sponsors for tonight's event, including the University of Wisconsin-River Falls Office of Sustainability and Hope for Creation. Tonight's presentation will feature Mike Thompson, John Vaughn, and Autumn Fisher speaking on clean water, affordable energy, and sustainable industry solutions that are a modern success. Before I hand things over to our speakers, I would like to acknowledge the sponsors who work to make this event possible. Our host for the Sustainability Speaker Series is the River Falls Public Library. We are very thankful to have this library as part of our community and appreciate their ongoing efforts to support our community. Our other sponsors include Powerful Choices, a department of the River Falls Municipal Utilities, the University of Wisconsin-River Falls Office of Sustainability, which works to improve sustainability in all its facets by working collaboratively across campus and beyond, and Hope for Creation, a group of area churches partnering to create a sustainable future. Thank you again to all of our sponsors for your hard work in our community and region. As I mentioned, tonight's presentation is focused on water, energy, and industry with Mike Thompson, John Vaughn, and Autumn Fisher. Mike Thompson is the founder of Kairos Indoor Agriculture, a successful hydroponic farm located here in River Falls that grows produce using space-saving vertical growing and water-saving methods. John Vaughn, who is the Director of Public Works for the Village of Roberts, and Autumn Fisher, who works with CLEARAS Solutions, will be speaking on Roberts' state-of-the-art CLEARAS system. This system, simply put, uses algae to filter wastewater, providing a new, sustainable, and innovative solution for municipalities. So without further ado, I'm pleased to introduce tonight's first speaker, Autumn Fisher and John Vaughn. Thank you.
Sorry.
That's okay. So the company was actually started about 13 years ago. It was by two of our co-founders working out of their garage and starting to build these first reactors. And their main objective at that time was actually to grow algae for biofuels. It was during the boom when everybody thought that they were going to make millions off of biofuels. But what they soon realized is that it costs more to purchase the nutrients and feed the algae, because the algae needs nutrients, it needs phosphorus and nitrogen, carbon dioxide. So it costs more to feed the algae than the algae was actually worth when the process was all said and done. So they were seeking cheaper alternatives for nutrients, and that's when they partnered with the Missoula wastewater plant. Wastewater plants have an abundance of nutrients. They generally have discharge requirements that they have to meet before they can discharge their water. So they began feeding wastewater to the algae, and partnering with the Missoula wastewater plant, the lab there was doing some testing on the water that was coming off the back end of the process, and they said, "What are you doing to this water? It's so clean. Like, we've never seen anything that gets the water so clean." Like, "Oh, I don't know, but we're growing a lot of algae." Like, no, the water is so clean. There's no phosphorus. It's very low in nitrogen. And they were just so focused on the algae that they were growing in the process that they didn't realize the benefits of the wastewater treatment side of things. And about that point in the business, the paradigm shifted and the focus actually became a wastewater treatment company and not necessarily an algae technology or algae growing company. Now, obviously, there's a lot of benefits to the algae that I'll get into, but our number one objective is actually wastewater treatment. So we partner with wastewater plants to meet their very low or their strict requirements before they can discharge their water. So Roberts is one of those specific examples, and I'll talk a little bit about what they have to do before they can discharge their water. So again, just highlighting the process, there's really 4 main steps. In the first step, we're mixing the existing wastewater from the treatment plant with algae. That gets mixed in what we refer to as our mixed tank. We introduce carbon dioxide, so the algae actually needs CO2 for photosynthesis. The CO2 is actually an important piece in the sustainability conversation, so I'll touch on that in just a little bit. It then flows into the photobioreactors, so those were those glass tubes that you saw, so they are glass. That gives the best light transmissivity, so it gives the algae the most light that it can to go through photosynthesis. And then we proceed to the separation phase. So we're actually taking the water out of the algae mixture. Some of that algae goes back to the front of the process and gets mixed with wastewater again, and some of it gets harvested. So it's that harvested algae material that we'll talk about and what we actually do with that. But that's what actually provides value back to the wastewater plants because of the benefit and the value of the algae product. And then most importantly for wastewater treatment plants, we now have clean water. So we've taken out the phosphorus, we've taken out the nitrogen, we've increased the oxygen, the dissolved oxygen that gets discharged, which is also extremely important to the receiving bodies, to the water that's getting the wastewater. So talking about some of the biggest issues that we currently see related to algae and also the algae blooms, the nutrients in the waterways, and then the algae product. So one of the biggest reasons that wastewater treatment plants are regulated, so they have to meet phosphorus discharge requirements or nitrogen discharge requirements, metals discharge requirements, is to protect our waterways. And one of the biggest issues that we're seeing right now are the algal blooms. So you generally see it on the news during the summers. High amounts of algae blooming in the water, and that's because of the phosphorus and the nitrogen that are present. So what's happening is wastewater plants are being regulated more stringently. So their discharge requirements are getting more and more strict to protect the waterways so you don't have the algae blooms in the water. And what we've done is we've taken the problem, algae blooms, and we've turned it into a solution. We control it, we take it into a controlled environment. And then we have the byproduct. So another thing that's happening in the food industry is you have food-based products like corn and soy that are being used to produce other products. So you've got soy-based, plant-based plastics And one of the greatest benefits of the algae is that it's not food competitive. So it's not competing with corn, it's not competing with soy. We use less land. The water comes from the wastewater treatment plants because we need to treat the water anyways. We don't need fertilizers to grow the crops. The fertilizer is the wastewater. So that's another key benefit of the algae itself. So focusing on Roberts, I'm sure you guys are familiar. It's not too far away from here, just down the road. Roberts is a community of about 1,800 people. Roberts currently has what's referred to as a sequencing batch reactor. It's a wastewater treatment process that they have upstream of our technology. And they're designed for its 0.465 million gallons per day, so 465,000 gallons per day of wastewater that they can treat at their plant. But their average flow is only about 100,000 gallons per day. So one of the key components of Roberts seeking out the CLEARAS technology after looking at a variety of different options is what you see here. So their total phosphorus discharge limit. So previously their phosphorus had to be 1 milligram per liter before they could discharge it into the local lake. But what happened is those limits got more strict, more stringent, and their average total phosphorus now has to be 0.04 milligrams per liter. And that is substantial in terms of levels that they have to get to for treating their water. It is the lowest limit in the entire state of Wisconsin. Lucky John. And there's very few technologies out there that can actually get that low. And that's one of the keys. So they looked at a variety of different technologies. They looked at, there's mechanical processes out there. You can treat it with chemicals. So you actually add a whole bunch of chemicals to the water, and then you have to take it through a filtration process or a settling process. And ultimately, when it came down to it, after this evaluation process, there was nothing else out there that did it as good as we did it and consistently met the levels that John needs to get to at his wastewater plant, but also had the value of the algae and the residual income associated with the algae. So they made the choice to proceed with construction. So we broke ground in October 2019. The system is now fully constructed. It's designed to treat 150,000 gallons per day because, again, they only see about 100,000 gallons per day at their wastewater plant. And we will produce about 200 to 300 pounds of algae per day, and that's dry pounds. So I'll talk a lot about the algae biomass production as I start to talk about some of these plants, but 200 to 300 pounds per day for John. So I mentioned groundbreaking October 2019. Typical to any typical to any construction project. We had our fair share of problems along the way. 2019 going into 2020 was a pretty brutal winter. I don't know if you guys remember it, but it was extremely cold, early onset of winter, but we had to keep going. And along with that, and winter comes problems. So we had no choice but to keep going. We constructed these temporary hoop houses so we could pour concrete, even in the middle of winter. I think actual air temperature one day when we poured was negative 19 degrees. So not ideal for construction, but again, we had to keep going just because of Robert's compliance timeline. COVID slowed everything down. It has still slowed everything down. We've got projects going on right now that are still being impacted by COVID. Just general lack of responsiveness, but ultimately we got through it. You guys saw the picture on the previous slide. We are now fully constructed and commissioned. So here's a picture of inside of the greenhouse. So I showed you from the outside. So inside of the greenhouse, we've got these 5 photobioreactors. So the photobioreactors there are 140 feet long and they're 14 feet tall. The total volume within those reactors is about 20,000 gallons. And again, a view from the outside here. And then contained within this building is the filtration equipment and the processing equipment that it talks about. And that's where the algae is actually harvested. So what we do to inoculate our systems, so we have we refer to it as our stock culture fence. It's actually located in Utah, which is the location of one of our upcoming projects. So we actually shipped algae from Utah and inoculated the system for the first time. And then what you do is slowly over time, you start to feed it more and more and more until you're up to the full flow rate. And the algae is eating or consuming all of the nutrients in that water. The video also briefly mentions the brains of the system. So we have a fully integrated SCADA system. We call it our AIMS system, or our Algae Information Management System. So we can actually view John's entire process right from our houses, control the pumps, control the valves, alarms, if there's any critical alarms or responses that are required, all can be viewed and managed for the most part remotely. So that highlights the Roberts project. Just a couple of quick other projects to highlight. Mondovi, Wisconsin, which is not too far away. So Mondovi is in a similar situation where their future limit is going to be 0.05 milligrams per liter. They'll produce about the same amount of algae as the village of Roberts. They're building an entirely new wastewater plant, actually. So they're going to have our technology bolted onto this brand new wastewater plant. And that's all funded by the USDA. So recently had the groundbreaking there, and we should be wrapping up that project in fall of next year, 2022. And then Waupun, Wisconsin. So Waupun is quite a bit larger. Waupun is actually going to be 12 times larger than the Village of Roberts facility. So they will treat about 2 million gallons of water per day, and similar total phosphorus limits, pretty low, 0.05. And they're going to make about 2,000 to 3,000 pounds a day. So significantly more algae that they'll have. And similarly, they're also funded by the USDA. So we broke ground on that project in May of 2021. And currently, we are constructing the greenhouses on site. So that facility is going to have 10 greenhouse structures. They're 35.5 feet wide each, so 355 by 100 feet long. And then inside of those greenhouses, down towards this end, you can see them just starting to build those photobioreactors. And then another project that we have, this one's actually just entering design. This one's going to be located in Utah. So it's in South Davis, Utah, which is just north of Salt Lake City. So again, this one is even larger. They're going to treat about 9 million gallons of wastewater per day, and they're going to produce about 9,000 to 10,000 pounds of algae per day. So these wastewater plants, in finding the solution for their nutrient discharge requirements, have this algae biomass that they have as a result. And there's a variety of different things that we do with that. So primarily, there's two different ways that we process it. We take it out of the system, we dry it, and we ship it off to somebody and they take care of it. That's kind of the limited processing. But there's also advanced processing that's available. So you can actually take the algae cell and you can break it apart into a variety of different constituents. So you can break it down into fats, you can break it down into lipids, you can break it down into carbohydrates. And that's the advanced processing side and more of the biochemicals. So actually replacing things like EVA foams with plant-based sustainable plastic replacements. So similarly with like bioplastics as well. So two companies that we partner with and what we're doing with the algae, you've got Bloom on the left, and Bloom, what they do is they have an extrusion process that they use. They take the algae, put it through this extrusion process, and then make it into a biopolymer. And that biopolymer then gets made into moldable foams and plastics. They are working with, it's 20 of the 25 largest shoe manufacturers in the world to generate their Bloom foam that gets integrated into shoes as a plant-based sustainable plastic. We also have Living Ink, so we partner with Living Ink. What they're doing is a lot of black ink that is used for packaging is carbon-based. So what they're doing is they're actually making a replacement for carbon black ink out of algae. And with that, companies like Patagonia, who is one of their biggest customers, by the end of 2020, every tag that hangs from Patagonia clothing is going to be printed with algae. So all these companies that you start to see commercials for reaching carbon neutrality or carbon goals for reduction, things like this are ways that they're doing it. As simple as packaging, the boxes that they ship their materials in, or the tags that are hanging from their clothing, are all potential opportunities to give them credits for getting carbon replacement or reduction. So just another example, this was actually, it popped up on Living Ink's social media not too long ago. So the t-shirt that you see there on the left was printed with algae ink. So again, that replacement for anything carbon-based. And then the skis on the right are also made with algae. So just taking a step back, again, we've got kind of two different silos within our business. We've got the wastewater treatment side of things. We've got the clean water, which is extremely important. We've got the carbon inputs, so you're actually reducing greenhouse gas emissions, or you're capturing that carbon for use with the algae. And then you've got the bioresources side of things that we're looking at how we can actually break down and use the algae. So these are just some of the key names from some of our partners and who they sell their algae products to. And what we do with the wastewater treatment plants is we partner with them in a 20-year contract, so it's a guarantee. We take care of all of the marketing, the sales, going out and finding the buyers, because at the end of the day, the Village Roberts and John are not algae salespeople. They don't know the algae markets. They don't know the best options or what's going to get the most value. So we partner with them to find that.
Questions at the end?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to take this off while I'm here.
Well, that was fascinating. I had no idea that technology existed, and I'm a molecular biologist, so I'm kind of ashamed to say that. But thank you for that presentation. I think we actually set up the next one quite nicely. My name is Mike Thompson, founder of this company, Kairos Indoor Ag, and I'm very excited to talk about the story of this company. And I want to bracket it with an introduction or a context, since the topic tonight is water, kind of a context around water use, and especially water use in agriculture. And on the other end, a call to action, which is absolutely critical for all of us to be thinking about to continue to change this world and make it a better place. So I want to get your minds thinking a little bit about water use with an easy quiz. I don't think anybody warned you there'd be a quiz, but it'll be easy. So the first question, true or false, the same amount of water exists on Earth today as when the Earth was formed. True or false? Anybody guess? Want to guess? True. The fact that I put it up here makes it kind of obvious that it's probably true. So that is true. And the reason I put that question up here is because if you think about the Earth, I think about it almost in one respect as a terrarium. We used to make terrariums in school. It's an enclosed ecosystem, and all the water that goes into a terrarium is recycled, and it continues to grow that ecosystem. And that's the same thing for Earth. So we think about the water supply as being limited, and I think it helps create a sense of urgency that if we wreck the system that recycles our water, we have no place else to go for more water. Okay?
Mike, I'm not sure your mic is working.
Oh, apparently my mic is not working.
Did you turn it off? I made it.
There we go. Sorry, it got shut off. Okay, I'm just going to keep moving. So the second question, what % of the world's water is salty? This is a smart crowd. Yes, 97% is right. So far, the amount of water we have on Earth is limited, and almost all of it is unusable to us without some kind of processing. 97% is salt water. And the last question, what percent of the world's water is used to meet all human needs? That includes residential, manufacturing, community, agriculture, everything. Very good, 1%. So the other 2% is typically thought of as being locked in the ice caps. Now I think with climate change, that's changing a bit. But really, the point here that I want to emphasize is there's a limited amount of water. Of all of the water that we have on Earth, we only have a little bit of it available to us, and we already used a third of it to meet our needs, and the other 2/3 is locked in ice caps. So hopefully it can create a sense of urgency about how we treat our ecosystems that give us that water and purify that water for us. So let's get a little more specific about water use in Wisconsin. These are just some stats I pulled off of, I think it's the state website. We use 290 million gallons per day. That's just for domestic use. That does not include agriculture. That's an average of about 51 gallons per day per person. And in terms of creating a sense of urgency to sort of respect our water, and in the end, I'll talk a little bit more about a call to action. This is one of the kinds of things we can do to conserve water. If you're standing in a hot shower, and you love hot showers as much as I do, it seems like a big deal. But generally, it shouldn't be a big deal to reduce your shower time by 1 minute, okay? If we did that, we would save 3.1 billion gallons a year. So little things can make a huge difference in terms of water conservation. Now let's talk more specifically about agriculture. It's fairly well known that agriculture alone, of that 1%, okay, agriculture alone uses about 70% of that. That is estimated to be 2 quadrillion gallons. Now, what is 2 quadrillion gallons? Who can picture that? So I found this analogy or this way of visualizing it. That is approximately the amount of water that would cover the entire country, our entire country with 2 feet of water. That's the amount of water used in agriculture every year. Okay, so it's a tremendous amount of water that's used. And a little bit more background on agriculture. I've spent my career in agricultural genomics, so in agriculture, but more focused on the genomic aspect of it. And I just know that it's easy for agriculture to get a bad rap. So I want to talk about agriculture that in the sense that it has many faces. Some are very beneficial and actually really essential, and some are harmful. And I don't want us to lose sight of the beneficial aspects of agriculture. And so I'm going to go through a couple of slides here, but they involve these kinds of things. Obviously, we're fed because of agriculture. There's a lot of fuel that's generated from agriculture. It's a massive driver of economics, and it's a hugely innovative industry globally. So if we just look at a few stats, agriculture in 1960, the average farmer, this is in the US, fed about 26 people. Today, that's about 155. So that's a huge increase in productivity over the course of that time. It speaks to the importance of agriculture for feeding us, as well as the importance of innovation in agriculture. Renewable energy. Agriculture, over here we have biomass. This is all the sources of renewable energy and how they all are distributed out to meet the needs for these different sectors. I'm fascinated to see algae now in this. I don't think this includes algae, but I suspect that's going to be a rapidly increasing component of this. But based on this stat, if you look at wood and biofuels, this would be like ethanol, probably mostly ethanol, but also some biodiesel. This is a pretty significant portion of renewable energy that's generated from agriculture. It's a massive economic driver. It's the largest employer in the world. It accounts for 40% of employment globally and 17% in the US. That's tens of millions of people who have jobs that are in some way associated with agriculture work. And it's a massive driver of markets that are critically important to our economy. Here are just a list of some of the top export markets for our agricultural products. Every one of these numbers is in the billions. So we're talking about tens of billions of dollars that are generated in agriculture that give us access to these export markets. And if you think about our import-export imbalance, I'm not an economist, I don't know the exact number, but I think we import about $600 or so billion more than we export in terms of our total economy. But agriculture is a shining star in this mix because it actually exports more than it imports, and it's done that for a long time. So it's a vitally important thing to our economy. And the last thing here is about innovation. I think a lot of people who are not sort of integrally involved in agriculture don't think of it as very innovative. You know, you think of a farmer riding a tractor in the field. But I would tell you it's one of the most innovative industries in the world. These are just a couple of examples. If you just look at a couple of lines here, this flat line here is the total inputs for all U.S. factory product, U.S. total factor product growth. This is in agriculture, okay? So this is the total inputs to produce all of the agricultural products produced. And the top line here is basically the total output. So what this says is between about 1950 and 2016, the productivity increased by about almost threefold. Okay, that's just a reflection of innovation that's going on in agriculture. Here's a more specific example, corn breeding. Way back, corn yields were way down there around probably 20, 30, maybe 40 bushels per acre for a long time. Then we started to get hybrid corn. There's this double cross hybrid. Took a little while for farmers to get going on that. That started to increase yields, and we got single cross hybrids. And lots of innovation happened to keep this curve going up very rapidly in terms of corn yields. And so it goes from about 30 bushels per acre all the way up. Today it's close to 200 bushels per acre. You might have noticed some of these significant downturns. Those are years probably that were weather related, like severe droughts or really hot years and so on. So really the point here is agriculture is just amazingly innovative. It's very typical for farms to be completely tied into big data sources. You can't practically operate a farm anymore without being connected to the internet. Use robotics and automation. Talking about GPS planters and harvesters that automatically map their way through the field. You have drones that are monitoring fields for soil moisture, for disease, for maturity. All kinds of these things driven totally by big data tech and analytic technologies. So it's hugely innovative. Now, all of that benefit comes and has come with a cost. And so some of those costs are harmful to us. So we talked about water use, the amount of water, the massive amount of water that agriculture uses. And it's not just the amount of water, but it's what some of the results of what agriculture is doing to our water. Pollution is one of them. A lot of people are familiar with nutrient runoff and pesticides and herbicides getting into the groundwater. Some people aren't so familiar with the fact that there's a huge amount of animal waste generated in production agriculture situations, which in some cases at least get spread on fields at much too high concentration. They degrade the soil health and they leach into the groundwater. So that animal waste in general can be a pretty big problem. It isn't necessarily a problem, but in certain cases the way it's handled is a problem. Land is getting massively eroded, declining soil health, and of course we're generating greenhouse gases that are contributing to climate change. So there's some harmful effects. So what do? Well, now we enter Kairos Indoor Ag. So, my wife and I, Lisa sitting over here, got to thinking some years ago about wanting to start a company on our own, something local that would have impact. I come from the agricultural genomics field. I thought, let's see if we can do something that would be just really different, unique and innovative in agriculture. And that was kind of the energy for starting this company called Kairos Indoor Ag. Our mission is to help people eat better. I hope as I continue to go through this, you're going to expand your idea of what I mean by better. In this context, most people think just nutrition, but it means a lot more than just nutrition. And our brand is Greater Good Greens. So as I said, I I should speak for myself. I'm fairly late in my career. I still have a lot of energy in my gut. I want to do something to have a positive impact on the world, as does Lisa. We're all about eliminating poverty and hunger and creating healthy families and communities. And so some time ago, we put a business plan together to start this company. One of the things, another factor involved in thinking about what kind of company we would start is the changing landscape in terms of consumer demands. I think this is a really fun example. I want to point out this is an industry magazine called Successful Farming, which means this goes to farmers. And you see what's on the cover here is a picture of a mother and her child in a shopping cart. And this consumer is a farmer's new boss. And that is absolutely a driving force in what farmers are producing, all the way back the value chain to what technology is trying to help farmers produce. Okay, it is changing what we call the food equation. It has become much more multidimensional than it was when I was that consumer's age. And consumers today are thinking more about public health, water and land, economic development, nutrition. All of these things go into their decision making. And vertical farming, or indoor or controlled environment farming, as it can be called, is checking all of the boxes in that multidimensional food equation. We have economic benefits, environmental benefits, social benefits, political benefits. It's truly checking all of the boxes. And what it's resulting in is more of an emphasis in grocery stores on the perimeter of the store rather than the interior. So the fresh foods are on the perimeter as opposed to the processed foods that are in the interior. And it's really driving a focus on that perimeter of the grocery stores. So let me talk a little bit about the technology that we use. This is a picture of it. It's called a Flex Farm. It is produced by a company that is called Fork Farms. They're based in Green Bay. When I started this business plan process, I had settled on a different technology, and I ran into the people at this company at a state education convention of all places, and I really got sold on this instrument. Everything on this thing is, except for parts of the light bulb, is made and manufactured and put together in Wisconsin. I kind of like that about it as well. Basically, the way this works is that there's two tanks on the bottom that hold a nutrient solution. There's a little tube right here that actually is attached to a pump on one side here. It goes up and it pumps water or nutrient solutions to a drip tube around the top edge of this. This is the end of the drip tube on each side. And then these panels in here, you put plant plugs in the holes. The plants grow out towards the light. This is a light pole in the middle. And the roots grow down inside this chamber. This is called a root chamber. So the roots are dripped with nutrient solution 24/7. The plants grow out towards the light. We're on different kind of light cycle. That's not 24/7. We started with 12 of these systems. And by the way, we're located in a building owned by Dennis in the back here, a local resident who has a building just up in the North Business Park, just north of the old Shopko building. So it's really convenient. It's super local. We started with 12 of these systems, and we quickly realized we couldn't grow enough to supply the demand, and so we managed to expand to 44 of these systems. We start the process with this stuff called rock wool. So this is basically a reformulated lava. Think of cotton candy, but made out of rock. It's spun into something that if you look at it, you'd say that looks like insulation. It's not. When you get it wet, it's soft, and it's a great matrix to germinate seeds in. So the seeds, we plant the seeds in the holes. You'll notice it's notched on the bottom, and that's so that after the seeds germinate, you can just easily tear off a square, and that becomes the plant plug that goes in those holes in the Flex Farm. Once the seeds are planted in here, they sit in this for about two or 3 days until they germinate, and then we put them in a flood table. We call it a flood table or a flood tray. You kind of see a tray here. These are racks of plants that are in those rock wool in a flat. These things get a drink 15 minutes at a time, about 6 times a day. So that's all automated, it's on a timer. This is a rack system. They're in these flood trays for about 2 weeks, and then after that, they get transplanted into the flex farms. And they just end up growing into these gorgeous, lush plants. And I keep telling people, it's like walking in the middle of winter, it's like walking into a tropical rainforest. It's just a lovely place to be. And you just kind of want to close yourself in there and eat your way out. You can see they just get super lush. This is a green butter. They just grow out the edges and they grow out the top and everything. And then once they get about this maturity, about 3 weeks in there, we harvest them and we package them based on the way they need to be packaged for either grocery stores or restaurants. We have 5 products. These are the 5 products: romaine, butter blend, which is just like a living lettuce or a butter head, but we take the leaves off and blend red and green butter. Basil, spring mix, and butter heads. The butter heads are the ones that have the root ball still on them. I think we have a great syndicate of customers. We just started this company last year, so it's growing rapidly. We're in a number of grocery stores, 4 of the Dick's markets, Fresh and Natural in Hudson, Co-op in River Falls here. We've done a little business with the River Market in Stillwater. We're in a couple of restaurants. Just started getting into restaurants really in the last month or so. Junior's in town. Is going to start highlighting our romaine. I think we have some fantastic, dark, rich romaine. Jay Selby's, I'm told by my daughter, is one of the most popular vegan restaurants in the Twin Cities. Really proud to be supplying them with butterheads and basil. And I'm super excited to announce that we're in late stages of talking about expanding putting another farm in the new Tattersall building, which for those of you who are local is an old Shopko, and they completely renovated that building. If you drive by it at all, you're probably pretty excited to see, because it looks like they're really doing a lot to it. And as I tell everybody, if you have high expectations from driving by and looking at it, they're not high enough. You're just going to be absolutely amazed when you get to go in there and have a meal or whatever. But we're going to put a farm in there and supply the lettuces, herbs, and various things for their restaurant, and eventually, hopefully, for their event activity as well. The final thing here is, you might be wondering at this point, okay, that sounds all great, indoor farming, luscious plants, but how is it really better than conventional farming? Or is it really better in a sustainability way? So a little bit about conventional farming of lettuce, that is. I'm involved in a number of scientific organizations. One of them took a trip to Yuma, Arizona. Almost everything we get in the wintertime here and across most of the middle and east coast of the U.S. comes from as leafy greens or vegetables, that is, comes from Yuma, Arizona, Salina, California, and some little parts of Mexico. So this is one of the massive areas where they grow this. It's 45 to 55,000 acres in this area that grows lettuce. You can see the massive expanse of land. It's a very intensive process. They have beautiful lettuce, but they basically bus in immigrants. This is very close to the border with Mexico. They bus in immigrants every day. It's all legal. I don't want to give this a bad name. I think it's a great process. They bring this big truck that essentially has all the operation they need to harvest the lettuce, process it, put it in a box, and put it on a truck. And right from the field, it goes to a store. Fantastic, I think. And they're also using a lot of reusable materials. So again, in the interest of, I don't think we should give conventional agriculture as bad a rap as it often gets. This is, I think, an amazing process. There are some downsides. If you look at this picture, I know it's a little distance for you and it's not as clear, but there's a lot of lettuce in this right here. That's what is left after they harvest. So there's a lot of waste from this process. Over here, it hasn't been harvested yet. This has all been harvested. So there's a lot of waste left in this process. So now, if you compare that to the way we are doing it at Kairos Indoor Ag using these flex farms, here's a few parameters to think about. I put this on a 1 acre basis just to normalize it. In 1 acre, we we use a factor of about 15 square feet per flex farm. So in 1 acre, you could get 2,904 flex farms. The average, it varies a little bit, the conventional growing season or time from spring. If you do it in the fall, it's like 65 days. In the winter, it's about 120 days. So I took the middle, I took 90 days as an average, okay, in terms of the growing cycle for a conventional. And what we can do in 90 days is 4 cycles. So ours is 3 weeks. There's 1 cycle in 90 days, ours is 4. They'll produce an average of 26,000 heads in an acre. Sounds huge. It is. It's a great yield. We'll produce 1.6 million heads using our technology in the same equivalent space in the same time frame. Now, obviously, we don't have an acre of flex farms, but that's what would be possible. That's the apples to apples comparison. And since we're really focused on water tonight, this can vary depending on the season and how much water they get, but it's very dry in Yuma, Arizona. They get very little water. It'll take between almost 900,000 gallons and 1.3 million gallons for 1 growing cycle, okay? In our case, for 2,904 flex farms to go 4 cycles, it'll take about 140,000 gallons. So I call this sustainability factor over here on the right. And so in terms of growing cycles, we can do 4 cycles to 1. In terms of yield, it's absolutely massive. If you're in the agriculture industry, you're familiar with it, if you get a 1% yield increase or a 2% yield increase through breeding, that's really good. We're immediately getting a 64x increase in yield just using this technology and the process we're doing. And we're using about 1/10 of the water that it would take to do it conventionally. So really just incredible improvements improvements in terms of sustainability over growing this conventionally. So now you might be thinking, well, okay, I'm convinced. Why isn't everybody compelled to do it this way? And I guess the fundamental reason is there's a pretty big capital cost to putting the technology in place to doing this sort of thing. And so, these flex farms, their list price is $4,995. It would cost you a pretty good chunk of money to buy almost 3,000 of them. And certainly a whole lot more than it would cost you to buy an acre of land and go out and farm an acre of land. So that is still something that I think is a barrier to a lot more people getting into this. But I will tell you, in the last 3 or 4 years, there have been literally hundreds of millions of dollars poured into this kind of thing through venture capital money. So it is really taking off in the big venture capital funding arena. And they're doing it in ways that are not necessarily my vision or philosophy. Those people are investing in massive greenhouse facilities, massive rack systems, and so on. And they're going to produce, and I think in a very efficient way, but then they're going to ship it all over the place. And my vision for this is, like I said earlier, to have a local impact. I want to be able to service a local area with the capacity we put here, and then when we max out that capacity, and we find that there's a need or market in another local community, we go put another farm there, rather than building one huge farm that would service, the entire state or the entire region or so on. So, all of this leads to, when we think about sustainability and environment and so on, we're often left with, well, gosh, what can I do? I mean, I can't solve the water problem. I can't solve the pollution problem. I can't, so on and so forth. But I would challenge you to really take seriously the idea that if we each just thought of one thing and just did it, that's a really important starting point. And here are 5 ideas of something you might think about doing if you're not already, and maybe many of you are already doing all of these things. Simply eat more plant-based food and less processed food. That alone, again, nothing against processed food in terms of the economics of it, but in terms of the environment and the sustainability of it and the health of it, you're just going to be much better off to eat more plant-based foods. There's a really large impact in this these CAFOs, this is concentrated animal feeding operations, like feedlots, where they have massive numbers of animals, sometimes thousands of animals in a very small area. That has a major negative impact on the environment. So, but you can find beef. I love beef. I went to a plant-based diet myself for about 3 months over the summer, but I love eating meat. And you can find plenty of sources of meat that are raised in a much more sustainable way. So just find those sources, and there's several of them right here in this area. 2 of them I can think of right in River Falls. Simply planning meals is really hard if you have two people in your house and they both work, and you just get home, you don't know what you're going to have for dinner, and so you just kind of do something fast. But the more we can get into the habit of planning meals, the more we can plan out how we're going to eat a plant-based diet, fix the meals at home with fresh food instead of processed or pre-prepared. By bulk, to limit the packaging, and source from local growers and local producers. We have great farmers markets here and in the surrounding communities. And I want to be clear that, what we're doing with our indoor farm is complementing all of that. I absolutely don't feel that we're competing with any of those entities or those sources of fresh food. I feel like we all need to be successful to really make a shift in how everybody thinks about food and how we impact the environment. So with that, I'll stop, and I guess we can take questions for both topics.
Is there any, you consider selling the units themselves?
Well, Fort Farm sells the units. So they have probably 1,000 of these units out across the country in schools. And they're increasingly getting more units in commercial operations. I think today we're the biggest commercial operation using those units. But yeah, anybody can buy those units, and I would fully encourage you to look into that if you're interested. Yeah. Energy is my biggest cost. With 44 units, my energy bill is about $1,000 a month. So that's my biggest cost, but compare that to what it would cost to farm, when you see that operation on that conventional farm. And I think my Marine is still here, so if everybody can help me lobby to get an agricultural rate, even though I'm not on land that's zoned as agriculture, that would be really cool.
What do you use for packaging for your product?
For grocery stores, we use clamshells, and that's really driven by the fact that you have to meet the market need. But what we use is plastic, and I don't like the amount of plastic we use, but at least we do use plastic that is made from recyclable material, and it is also recyclable. So it's that high-grade plastic that you can recycle, and it came from a recycled product. We could get into compostable plastics. I have thought about that, and then and everybody needs to help me understand this better, because then I heard that sometimes that can actually be more challenging from the consumer and the recycling side. Because compostable plastics, like I don't think we have a place in River Falls where we could take those. So people would typically think, well, I'll throw it in the recycling bin, but it's not exactly recyclable plastic. So I've sort of steered away from that for now.
For now.
Yeah.
I have a last question. I just wanted to know, because a lot of your solutions seem like good ones, but a lot of times, people maybe can't afford the local stuff or the organic stuff versus the farm. I was just wondering what your products local versus commercial farm was.
Yeah, it's a good question. They're exactly the same price. Yeah. I went into this maybe because I've been embarrassed enough throughout my career that I didn't have the illusion that I could go in and say, well, I have a really special product that you can sell for more money. It just doesn't work that way. So I went in saying, I got to be able to meet the price that wall of lettuce in most grocery stores it has already. And mine's now part of that wall of lettuce. Yeah.
Are you working with the solar garden then for all of your
I am hoping to, I'm not working with the solar garden, but like we do with our home energy use, we buy credits so that that amount of energy is covered through renewable energy sources. And as this business gets mature, I'm planning to use that system to be able to cover all the energy. Now the really amazing thing about, one of the really amazing things about this Tattersall building, they put solar panels on that entire roof. That's an 89,000 square foot building. That those solar panels will meet all of their energy needs and more. So in that case, if we expand in there, we will fully be using renewable energy. Yeah.
I was curious about the products and the shoe products that are made in terms of recycling, or what happens to the shoe products that are in this movement?
So in terms of the shoe products that are made, or they call it the bloom foam, the products themselves, it's just a plant-based plastic. So it's just more sustainable, not necessarily that it's more biodegradable. But generally it's a blend, so they do have to still use some typical plastics that are petro-based combined with the algae biopolymer.
Is algae ever actually used for like biofuel purpose anymore?
It is, yeah. So there's different strains of algae that are better for different products. So the type of algae that grows in our system, we're not trying to grow a specific strain of algae. It's actually a variety of strains. It's a polyculture because there's multiple strains of algae that grow together. So the algae that's good for biofuels is actually very high in fats and lipids. And that's just better for that particular process. The algae that grows in our system is actually pretty low in fats and lipids, and it's high in protein. So you can think of it as like a marathon runner. In our system, it's very high in protein, lean, mean, fast machine. And then you've got the biofuel algae that's like the lazy couch potato. Yeah.
So as a marathon runner, and as somebody who just left a company that was focused on plant-based protein, is that one of the source, or is that one of the outputs that you're really trying to maximize? This whole plant-based protein crave in the food industry is just massive.
Yeah, that's a great question. So our algae is typically 40 to 50% crude protein, so very high plant-based sustainable protein. So good for like feedstock, supplement and replacement, cattle, fish, that kind of stuff. People get a little leery when you start to say that algae treated wastewater and then you might consume it. That's very true. So it all comes back to how the algae is actually regulated too. So states, each state regulates the algae differently as it comes off the treatment process. So in the state of Wisconsin, the algae is actually regulated as a biosolid, which is similar to how sludge is regulated. So if you can meet Class A requirements, which are stringent, there's a certain set of metals and different parameters that you have to meet, then you can use that algae for pretty much anything. But we are not actively pursuing it.
Just to be clear, just like you do with soybeans or green peas, you would purify the protein, you would just put the algae in just because it's high in protein.
Right,
Yeah.
yeah.
Mike?
For John, so with the outputs, from what water is coming into your system and the water is going out, would that change at all? From the amount of water that's going into food waste?
No, our flows have been about the same for probably the last 5 or 6 years. Once this is totally up and running, we will use a little bit less. Right now, in the original part of our wastewater plant, to run some of the processes requires water to wash things off. When you go through your grit removal and screening, things like that. So we are using actually well water for that, or city water. Now with the CLEARAS, the product is so clear at the end or clean, we're actually reusing that water instead. So that ends up about 5,000 gallons a day, is roughly what we use in our process control. So our flows will change by about that much.
How did you get stuck with the point 4.
Yeah.
We were the lucky winners. The state of Wisconsin passed some regulations and they kind of put the cart before the horse. The area where Roberts discharged to was Twin Lakes. In Wisconsin, it's known as the 303D list, which is an impaired body of water. There are no outfalls to the lake system, but a lot of runoff runs into that lake, so they are traditionally green. So with the code changes, because it was on the impaired body of water list and no outfall, Roberts fell into the category, and we were the first community that our permit came up for renewal when they changed the regulations, and we were the winners. When we got this limit of 0.04, there was no technology out there to get you to that point. So we partnered with CLEARAS, and this will be the first fully algae plant in the world.
So how could the state of Wisconsin give you a number that can't be met with the current technology that they have? I mean, that's.
We asked that same exact question,
Mind-boggling to me.
and the answer we were given was, and I sat right at the table with our village president, with the Wisconsin DNR, and we were told, well, that is your problem. You need to find the technology, and here is the date that you need to meet these limits.
I wouldn't have been real happy with that.
No, we had attorneys involved, and I'll be the first to admit, we did fight, and at the end, here we are, we're grown algae. And that's been the exciting part. I mean, it truly has. I mean, we are definitely in favor of removing all nutrients you can, and that's been the exciting part with this. We looked at other technologies. We did look at other technologies, and if the only thing we looked at was phosphorus, because that's really what drove this whole process for Roberts. There's some other technologies that would get you down to that 0.04, but they used a tremendous amount of electricity or power. They used a tremendous amount of chemical, and then at the end of the day, that's all they removed. With the CLEARAS and growing algae, we were very quick to learn that things like ammonia, nitrates, things like that, the algae required that to grow. So not only were we able to remove phosphorus, now we're able to remove these other nutrients. And the handwriting's on the wall. The limits are going to be stricter and stricter to get cleaner and cleaner water. So we knew if we went with some of this other technology, the next time our permit's coming up for renewal, well, now we got to add another process to remove, say, ammonia. Well, then you got to add another process for this. The algae is taking care of all of that for us. So it's kind of one-stop shopping and long-term sustainable. So that's pretty much what drove us to this. And it was kind of a unique thing. We were in the market for someone, and CLEARAS was in the market for a first full-fledged customer, so we teamed up.
Did you have a question then?
Oh, he answered it.
Oh, you.
Have you seen the difference in the water quality of the lake?
Not yet. Over time it will, because of dilution was in there. Through a lot of the studies that have been done, the bulk of the phosphorus is coming off the sediment at the bottom. Over the course of years, the lake level has come up, it's went down. Low years, you get a lot of vegetation growing in the lake. Well, then when the water level comes up, that vegetation dies. As it lays in the bottom, it releases all the nutrients, which are basically phosphorus is the biggest source right there. Combine that, the state of Wisconsin built a series of islands and created nesting habitats for ducks, geese, herons, and grebe islands. The droppings from waterfowl are extremely high in phosphorus. So it's going to be a slow process to really clean those lakes up unless the lake is actually dredged. But the water we're putting in will basically be drinking water standards.
Yeah, I just had a question. What measures are in place to prevent upstream and input affecting the common health?
Yeah, good question. So we have a list of water quality parameters that the water has to meet before it can come into our system, and that's to protect the biology, basically. So we monitor for things like metals, other nutrients, and things along those lines. It's not real-time in situ analysis. It's just composite samples or spot checking. And if we have any problems, then that's typically something that we'll look into.
Since this is, correct me if I'm wrong, you said this is your first customer?
Yep.
Have you guys tried the system, like, at different scales before, like, just to see, like, what the maintenance, or like,
Yep.
you know, you talk about upstream, like, issues, or?
Yeah, so we have
That's
done.
what we're in here.
We have done a significant number of pilots, and the way that we pilot, so a lot of wastewater plants want to know, or they say, oh, you've done it here, but my wastewater is different, so I want you to do it here and test it here. So similar, we did that at John's facility for the village, and we go out and we pilot all over the United States. And we do that in batch mode, and then we do it in continuous flow mode. So we're feeding 24/7 to the system. We have systems that we deploy and actually go and set up greenhouses. And then down in Utah, we actually have that stock culture fence that it's used as a seed source and for design validation. So it's basically our R&D center. And that facility is actually actively treating wastewater from that Utah plant that we're going to be building at.
With the flex farms, is there any problem with contamination?
With contamination in the flex farms, we haven't had any serious problems yet. You know, you can imagine we're creating some humidity in the environment we're growing in, so we have seen a little bit of mold in places, but we try to keep that under control as best we can. We generally, when we switch them, when we start a new cycle, we'll clean the panels and we'll spray it down with hydrogen peroxide. But we haven't had any other, really any major issues. Yeah, it's been going for about a year. And by the way, mold is a pretty common issue in most vegetables and leafy greens, grown in just about any way you grow them. So, it's a fantastically engaged crowd. Yes?
Is there any thought about any other type of vegetable you can do this with?
Yeah, you can grow virtually anything in these instruments. And like I said, they have a bunch of these in schools across the country. People grow pumpkins and beans and tomatoes, everything you can imagine. If you're going to try to do it commercially, there's a lot of different considerations to make. So I'm not going to probably grow pumpkins commercially in these, but we are talking about growing more herbs. This is a starting point for us. I would love to grow tomatoes commercially. You could grow beans, not soybeans probably, but green beans, string bean type things. Oh yes, edible flowers. This seems to be a big kind of trend, or maybe it's just I'm catching up to the trend. So yeah, you can grow a lot of different things. Yeah.
I just had a question for you, because you said you were focused on a lot of local individual sort of solutions. Which is cool. But I have a lot of skeptical friends when I share, like, yeah, maybe you should reduce your shower by 1 minute.
Yeah.
Say stuff like, well, you're a fraction of the solution, right? The solution, a lot of people didn't come from like the top down, big corporations, government policies. What would you say to people who are skeptical about these individual?
Yeah. I don't know, I'm just reminded of this Chinese proverb. The best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. Second best time is today. You got to start somewhere. And if you started 20 years ago, maybe you could quantify the difference that would have made. So if we start today, we're going to start quantifying that difference from today forward. And then, then there's power in numbers too. So it is easy to just say, well, what can I do? I don't know, I can't solve these problems. my 1 minute and less in my shower is really gonna matter. But, you know, it's the same principle for this as it is for elections, as it is for a lot of things. All of us contribute to this sort of thing, and it all adds up to an actual impact. Yeah.
Aren't you working with the schools?
Well, I'm trying to get students employed at the farm. And I've had some people from the schools and the university come and visit, the chancellor and the dean of the Food and Agriculture College and so on. We haven't really started much of an active program with them yet, but I would love to. Yeah. You have a question?
Yeah, with driving forces consumers who are changing their diets, what are the groups you see who are also changing the way that they eat, who are also going to choose to weigh how we adjust to more sustainable consequences?
What other groups did you say?
Yeah, what are the groups?
Oh, other than like the young consumers?
Yeah, like the farming out there, like.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a group that has really been pushing this shift in the consumer realm. But when that shift is pushed and it starts to actually happen, then you see all kinds of, you know, everybody follows. It isn't just young people now that are looking for this kind of stuff. It's people my age and everybody in between. And by the way, these types of technologies are starting to be driven in other countries, especially countries where sustainability is really an issue, where they can't grow enough food to be even self-sustainable. So I don't know if I can target any specific group, but I think the fact that these things are starting to take off is changing the behavior of a lot of people across the society. Most people don't look at their lettuce and think about where it's grown. But if you look at it today, I'll bet you more than half of it is grown in some local indoor greenhouse or other type of approach. You just don't know it, but so if you're buying lettuce at the grocery store, you're probably buying something that, or it's not unlikely that you'd be buying something that is actually grown by an indoor or controlled environment growing situation.
So with that, sorry.
Yeah.
With that, what country do you see for your viewpoint are doing it right, some of these practices?
Not China, Africa is starting to get this kind of stuff going in terms of their thinking and how they can implement this stuff across the country. Malaysia, Philippines, countries like that. Somebody over here, Bill.
It's an old statistic, but they used to say that you look at the food on your table, the average distance of that food came, the average is 1,500 miles.
Yeah, Bill is pointing out that it's an old statistic, but there's a statistic that people used to cite that says if you look at the food on your table, the average distance it traveled to get to your table is 1,500 miles. I'm saying that for the people who are online, if there's anybody online. And I can tell you that there are wholesalers that I've talked to about potentially private labeling for that will fly herbs in here from Egypt in the wintertime just to have a supply of it. So it's just amazing to me that happens, but it does. Aaron?
Yeah, so obviously agriculture is pretty dependent on climate. Do you think the government will actually start investing in these flex farms, hydroponics for farming to make us more competitive in the global market?
I think so. I hope so. There's a lot of grant type money more in the early stages of technology development, certainly to go into things like drones and algorithms for drones and even this kind of technology. There are government programs right now, they're not necessarily aimed at this type of technology, but they're certainly supporting this around recovery from COVID, economic programs. But there's a lot of money from the government that gets put into more of the early stage research type stuff, where I don't know the quantities, but I think maybe more money is coming from venture capitalists when it gets to more of the commercial, or closer to the commercial end of things. So. All right, I think we may have exhausted the questions for the people.
thank you again for our wonderful presenters, Mike, John, and Autumn. We appreciate all the knowledge that you've shared with us, as well as the work you've done within our community and region, and in the case of CLEARAS, so across the country. So before we depart, I would like to highlight the next event in this series, which will be on January 31st at 6:30 p.m. This event will feature Dr. Mark Seeley, who you may have heard on NPR, a professor emeritus in the Department of Soil, Water, and Climate at the University of Minnesota. Dr. Seeley will be speaking on climate change, sustainability, and pathways ahead. And please note that this event will take place, you can come in person at the First Congregational United Church of Christ's Fellowship Hall, or you can tune in live via the library's Facebook page or YouTube channel. So thank you everyone for coming tonight, and have a great night.